بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قال الله الحكيم في كتابه الكريم: إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على محمد وآل محمد كما صليت وسلمت وباركت على إبراهيم وآل إبراهيم في العالمين إنك حميد مجيد. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you for coming to this session, the third session of the series of presentations. Today we will be talking, inshallah, about these items. That's equality and efficiency, which is an idea that was put forward in 1975 by Arthur Okun, saying that in capitalism that there has to be a trade-off between efficiency and equality, and that if one goes one way, increases inequality, goes the other way, reduces efficiency, and so you have a problem. And therefore you have to have a right balance between having equality and efficiency. And institutions of capitalism are set up to create that kind of a balance. So we'll talk about this a little more. And we will look at evidence, empirical evidence, as to whether or not there actually is something called a trade-off between equality and efficiency. Does one have to sacrifice one for the other? And we look at some of the, we've talked about the political effects of inequality. We have said the damages that it does to the society by creating a gulf between the rich and the poor and undermining the social solidarity. There is also empirical evidence on serious health effects of inequality. In societies where you have massive inequalities, there are created enormous amount of side effects that relate to suicide, to imprisonment, all the social and health effects of inequality. We'll talk about that in a minute. Then we want to talk about somebody's idea. The person is called Simon Kuznets, who in 1955 proposed the hypothesis that economies generally go through phases. And in the first phases of industrialization, inequality increases, then reaches a height, and then begins to decline. And that as economic growth proceeds, you will have this inverted U shape that goes down and basically reduces inequality as societies begin to develop faster. And then we want to talk about Thomas Piketty. This was really, to begin with, we started out building up toward covering the ideas of this most popular book in recent decades, an economics book that has become a bestseller, general bestseller, not just an economic bestseller, and the ideas of Piketty, and we'll go through that. Basically, he has a historical narrative of what happened for the last 3 centuries. What happened to inequality? And we'll see that he has exactly the opposite of Simon Kuznets' idea, that actually you have a reduction in inequality from 1945 to 1975, and then from then on it begins to increase. And we want to talk about a little bit about things that actually led to this period, which is called the Golden Age of reduced inequality from 1945 to 1975, what happened in these cases. We'll also show you graphs of some of the emerging markets where they too are observing the same thing, not the Simon Kuznets inverted U, but actually a U-shaped distribution graph. And then he has something called the central contradiction of capitalism. This comes from Marx, but it doesn't explain exactly the same thing. Marx, we mentioned this before, that Marx's idea was basically that there is a serious contradiction which is central to capitalism, in the sense that labor actually helps its own demise by helping to produce capital goods, which it produces. Capital is then substituted for labor, and labor is laid off. So that was Marx's idea of the central contradiction of capitalism. Now, Piketty has a different idea. The idea is that what happens actually, you will end up having a huge rentier class which just does nothing, no work, but just collects income and wealth. And then that wealth starts earning income for them, so they really don't have to do anything. But that itself causes a problem which leads to the demise of, or at least the stress of capitalism, because you have all of the wealth is concentrated in the hands of few. The rest of the society don't have enough to purchase, and they don't have enough to consume. When their ability to consume reduces, it hurts capitalism to begin with. So you have a problem there. We'll talk about that. Then we talk about his solution. And this is where we are heading toward Islam, which will be the next lecture. Frankly, all of these three sessions are just trying to dovetail into what Islam says. And you'll see that these ideas are repeated. In other words, some of them exist in Islam as well, especially his, because Piketty's solution covers a wealth tax of 1 to 2%, 1% on lower wealth up to 500,000, and then 2% to 500,000 and up. And as you know, zakat, of course, is a wealth tax at 2%, 2.5%. So, and then he also talks about limiting inheritance. There's the first person who has ever proposed, to my knowledge, that in this very empirically strong set of observations. Other people have talked about it, but they have never been able they have not produced as much massive data to show that, in fact, the problem of inheritance is a serious problem for income and wealth inequality in capitalist societies. And then we want to talk about what do other economists say. The economists who have actually read Piketty, most of them are basically very famous. They are Nobel Prize winners, Nobel Prize laureates. We want to see what do they say about this situation of inequality and what kind of solutions they propose. And finally conclude this session. So let's start. I want to go back to some of the ideas we spoke about last time. This is the ideas of St. Thomas Aquinas. I mentioned earlier that St. Thomas was hugely influenced by Muslim scholars, by Al-Farabi, by Ibn Sina, by Al-Ghazali, and by Ibn Rushd. These were the most. Others have also, he was familiar with other people's writings as well, but most important ones were the ones we have already mentioned before. Basically, St. Thomas's ideas were that there is something called divine law. Divine law is the law that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has placed in how the system as a whole that He has created operates, particularly for humans, how humans can achieve what they call the beatific vision. Beatific vision, as I mentioned earlier, he says that this is a situation of ultimate happiness for human beings, unification with their Creator. But then person itself cannot do it by himself, needs the grace of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is something like we have in various ayat of the Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says you cannot cleanse yourself. You need Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's help to cleanse yourself. So these are ideas that he had picked up. And then he talks about universal law and the natural law. We've explained these before, so I won't take much time to do it. The crucial thing here is that natural law actually creates a situation where it provides a basis for human rights, because it creates natural rights, and the natural rights lead to human rights. But notice what those human rights are. One is the right to self-preservation. Second is the right of procreation. Third is right of education. And the fourth is the right to socialization. Now you should recognize these as maqasid al-sharia. The only difference is that when you see right to self-preservation, he puts right to property, he puts it inside that self-preservation, and his difference with Islam is that he argues that people have a right of possession to property, not the right of actually having full and unconstrained, unconditional property rights. They have the right to the possession of it. This means that they can use the property to satisfy their needs. Anything above that, he says, has to be transferred to other people, to the poor. That it has to be shared with the rest of the society. And then this right to education is the same thing as, of course, hifz al-aql, if you remember. He doesn't talk about hifz al-din because he comes from a position of being a Catholic, a Jew, and basically they assume that everybody believes in the tenets of Christianity, and therefore there's no need to talk about it, because you have the power of Rome, because this was basically the power to make everybody to become Christian, and if they weren't, of course, they face thing called Inquisition and so on and so forth. Then the thing important here is that from these natural laws and natural rights, the whole idea of social contracts came into being. It's very crucial for us to remember that, because all Western societies, some of them were actually originators of the idea of social contracts. Some of them actually operated their entire society on the basis of social contracts, such as, for instance, the U.S. Constitution. Basically came from the ideas of John Locke, who was influenced by Hobbes. And of course, additionally, they were influenced by Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who talked about social contracts. And as I mentioned last time, you have somebody like Joe Stiglitz saying that whatever social contract was in existence now is torn to shreds, and that it no longer exists. So, but we want to talk about the fact that inequality runs counter to the idea of social contracts. So if a society has social contracts in which people willingly give up part of their sovereignty to the society in order to look after their interests, those interests are undermined by inequality. Therefore, there is a violation of social contracts. So we see our social contract, of course, is the Quran. The minute you give the Shahadatain, you sign off on the Constitution, which is the social contract for Muslims. And therefore, society has to operate on the Quran's way of managing an economy, managing risk, and everything else. So basically, the first idea to remember where inequality is troublesome is the fact that according to John Locke and Rousseau, every human being has rights. Right to property, basically right to freedom, and also right to protection by the government. So the idea, Arrow, who is a Nobel laureate, he says that basically if income and property are the basis of freedom, its concentration implies an unequal distribution of liberty. In other words, the very thing that was the basis of formation of social contracts, liberty, the right to liberty, right to property, these are undermined, he says. That basically you no longer have equal liberties, and that's a violation of social contract. Stiglitz, as we said earlier, he says social contract has been torn to shreds. Now, there is last piece we want to talk about is the idea of Amartya Sen, another Nobel Prize laureate, and one of his students, Martha Nussbaum, who argue that talking about justice and distributive justice is the luxury of abstraction. You need to do something about inequality and poverty that is palpable and can work. And so the idea is to make individuals capable, give them the capabilities to take care of their own needs. And capabilities, in addition to all of the things that come under human rights, capabilities, they consider economic situation also part of human rights. And therefore you have to provide them with enough economic ability to be able to have the opportunities to live their lives to the fullest.